Thanks once again for joining us. Power has indeed changed hands in the United Kingdom, with the Labour Party sweeping the Tories out of power after 14 years. New Prime Minister Keir Starmer has appointed his cabinet office already, naming Angela Rayner as Deputy Prime Minister. He made his first speech as Prime Minister in Downing Street, calling on the four nations of the UK to join what he calls the government of service in the mission of national renewal. His speech comes after he met with King Charles at Buckingham Palace, who was formally invited to form a government. The Prime Minister led Labour to a landslide election win following a collapse in the Tory vote. Labour won 412 seats, while the Conservatives slumped to 120. We've seen several appointments to Mr. Keir Starmer's new cabinet. Angela Rayner, as we said earlier, is Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State for levelling up housing and communities. Rachel Reeves is the UK's first female Chancellor. David Lammy, Foreign Secretary. Yvette Cooper, Home Secretary. John Healey, Defence Secretary. Pat McFadden, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Here's more on what he said just outside the famed number 10 Downing Street.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation. I want to thank the outgoing Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. His achievement as the first British Asian Prime Minister of our country, the extra effort that will have required, should not be underestimated by anyone. And we pay tribute to that today. And we also recognise the dedication and hard work he brought to his leadership. But now our country has voted decisively for change, for national renewal, and a return of politics to public service. When the gap between the sacrifices made by people and the service they receive from politicians grows this big, it leads to a weariness in the heart of a nation, a draining away of the hope, the spirit, the belief in a better future, that we need to move forward together.
Earlier, Rishi Sunak resigned as Prime Minister and said he would also step down as Conservative Party leader, but not immediately. Just outside number 10 Downing Street, Mr. Sunak accepted responsibility for the results and apologised to defeated colleagues during a brief statement after the catastrophic night for his party. The Conservative Party suffered a huge collapse after a tumultuous 14-year in power, which saw 5 different prime ministers run the country. During his statement, he also touted the achievements of the Conservatives during 14 years of governance, saying that the UK was more prosperous, fairer and resilient than in 2010. After speaking, he said his wife, Ashakta Murty, headed to Buckingham Palace, where he tendered his resignation to the monarch.
Good morning. I will shortly be seeing His Majesty the King to offer my resignation as Prime Minister. To the country, I would like to say first and foremost, I am sorry. I have given this job my all, but you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters. I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss. To all the Conservative candidates and campaigners who worked tirelessly but without success, I am sorry that we could not deliver what your efforts deserved. It pains me to think how many good colleagues who contributed so much to their communities and our country will now no longer sit in the House of Commons. I thank them for their hard work and their service. Following this result, I will step down as party leader, not immediately, but once the formal arrangements for selecting my successor are in place. It is important that after 14 years in government, the Conservative Party rebuilds, but also that it takes up its crucial role in opposition professionally and effectively. When I first stood here as your Prime Minister, I told you the most important task I had was to return stability to our economy. Inflation is back to target, mortgage rates are falling, and growth has returned. We have enhanced our standing in the world, rebuilding relations with allies, leading global efforts to support Ukraine, and becoming the home of a new generation of transformative technologies. And our United Kingdom is stronger too, with the Windsor Framework, devolution restored in Northern Ireland, and our union strengthened.
Well, world leaders have been congratulating and commending Prime Minister Keir Starmer for his win. French President Emmanuel Macron wrote on X, formerly Twitter, saying, "We will continue with the work begun with the UK for our bilateral cooperation for peace and security in Europe, for the climate and for AI." His words echo those of other prominent global figures like Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who voiced hope that he and Mr. Starmer would remain reliable allies. Israeli President Isaac Herzog said that he hoped the two nations would strengthen their close friendship as Israel pursues its own war in Gaza. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen expressed her wish for a constructive partnership with Prime Minister Starmer, who has ruled out rejoining the EU. And Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau both sent congratulatory messages to the Prime Minister, who they called their friend. And to tell us more about this, we have two guests joining us for discussions on this. From London is Nathaniel Oguni, a political analyst, and Harry Burns, Vice President, Crestview Strategy and former head of elections for the Labour Party. He joins us from Kigali, Rwanda. Gentlemen, pleasure having you on the program, a historic time in the United Kingdom.
Great to be here.
So for Nathaniel, let's begin with the mood in London, where you are, and even across the country. A breath of fresh air, perhaps?
It's an incredible result. I think the polls since about late 2021 have suggested that Labour would win if a general election were held. And so I suppose in that sense, the result isn't a surprise, but the result is finally here. There's a difference between a theoretical Labour victory and an actual one, right? And we've gone from the theoretical to the reality. So I think a lot of people are sort of letting this news sink in.
So this is for both of you, but I'll put it to Harry. Before these elections, opinion polls have touted a Labour Party victory on this land scale. Why do you think Britain's kicked out the Tories this way?
Well, firstly, I think it's very important to look at how historic Labour's result was yesterday. Given where the party was back in 2019, it is miraculous that they managed to get to a place where they can win such a big victory. I mean, I think the result, in a way, masks an underlying problem for the Labour Party in that their support has been very wide, but it's not particularly deep, in that they got a smaller share of the vote in this election than they did in 2017. When I was head of elections for the party, we had a very unpopular leader back then, Jeremy Corbyn, and the party then managed to achieve 40% of the vote, but they got 200 less seats than they did this time, which goes to show that the electoral system might be covering up a bit of an issue for the Labour Party, in that they haven't really persuaded voters to go out and vote for Labour. They went out and voted against the Conservatives. So that's something that the party wants to address, I'm sure, immediately when they're in office.
Right, and Natalia, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think Harry's broadly accurate. If you look at the scale of the Labour victory in terms of the actual number of votes won, it's just that this Labour vote has been very efficient. So you look at seats like Hendon, which is in North London, and they've won Hendon by about 14, 15 votes, right? If you manage to win a number of seats across the country on a thin margin, then that stands you in good stead. Equally, that means, in 5 years' time, a lot of those seats may not go your way.
Right.
I mean, sorry, 27. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say in 2017, so I was in charge of targeting for the party, and we always try and run a really strategic campaign where we put resources in the places where it can have most effect, and we run what's called a target seat strategy. However, we've been unsuccessful in previous elections because you haven't had that really big party on the right splitting the Tory vote, which we had this year with Reform. Reform came from almost nowhere to achieve a miraculous result. I think again the electoral system shows up a bit of a failing in that Reform got 15% of the vote, I believe, something along those lines, but they only got about 4 MPs. They might have 5 depending on the result of the final one. So it goes to show that that they came from nowhere. They took a sizable chunk of the Tory vote. They came second, I think, in over 90 constituencies, which really did split the Tory vote and allow Labour to come through the middle and take them.
Right, and if I could just say with you, Harry, Rishi Sunak in his, resignation speech said he worked very hard, for the country, and he saw that the country, just wanted a change, and that's what the new Prime Minister also said. So why do you think that, the people really wanted this change so desperately, or is it all about the politics?
Well, I think Sir Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister, pointed out in his speech today that he believes that the country wants politics to impact less in people's everyday lives. For far too long, there's been chaos in Westminster, which has really impacted people's pockets. People are poorer, our public services are worse off. The country feels like it's going in the wrong direction. And I think for the first time in a long time, it feels like our children are going to be worse off than we were when we were growing up, which is just not the sort of position that is going to deliver a victory for a party that's been in power for 14 years. And in many ways, I think Rishi Sunak was dealt a very difficult hand to play. The Liz Truss catastrophe was calamitous, and it reverberated around the world. She was rewarded with a defeat in her seat today, so she's no longer an MP anymore, which goes to show that depth of feeling, the anger towards the party that was in power and presided over such a reduction in our living standards.
Right. Before I let you go, how do you think that the UK would fare under his Labour Party rule? Over 10 years since their last rule, and a lot of changes locally and, of course, globally.
So I think Keir Starmer has been very wise in surrounding himself with a lot of very experienced people who served under Tony Blair. There's no way that you can say that his staff aren't seasoned at governing. Obviously, there's a lot of new MPs. There's 200 or so people that have probably never been in the House of Commons before. So that's going to be a challenge in itself. But they're going to be very clear that they need to deliver from day one. They don't have this massive they have a massive mandate, but they don't have a massive level of support. So they need to show that they can deliver impact from the moment they walk into Downing Street. So as he said today, they understand that they're going to treat it with a sense of urgency and get on and deliver for people from day one.
And Nathaniel, foreign leaders have been congratulating him on his victory. I want to single out Ukraine and, of course, Israel because of the obvious reasons, the conflicts in their regions. These countries are at war. How can the UK help in ending these conflicts under the new leadership?
So the Labour Party have always been outspoken in their support of the Conservative government's support for Ukraine. So the Conservative government has sent several billion in aid. They've sent military weapons. They've sent other kinds of equipment to Ukraine. And the Labour Party have always been outspoken in their support for that. Equally, when it comes to Israel, the Labour Party have been clear that they would like to see a two-state solution. But the Labour Party have come under some domestic pressure. You see a number of Labour MPs, including actually Jonathan Ashworth, who was a shadow minister under Labour, so relatively senior within the Labour Party, who ended up losing his seat because of the pressure that he came under from candidates who were supporting the Palestine side of that situation. And so when you see that actually there's an emerging fracture within Labour, and there is the potential for Labour to lose more votes to that sort of flank if they don't address that issue.
And finally to you, Nathaniel, circling back to the elections, are there lessons, do you think, that can be learned, especially here in Nigeria? We understand non-citizens were able to vote, and that included some Nigerians.
Yes, so I think there has been some impact from other citizens, from Commonwealth citizens being allowed to vote. But broadly speaking, I think this election has ended the way that it really started. It started with Rishi Sunak on the steps of Downing Street calling for an election while he was 20 points behind, and it ended with Rishi Sunak on the steps of Downing Street acknowledging that he's now actually lost. So, broadly speaking, this is probably something we could have seen coming. I suppose there were some unfortunate mishaps during the campaign that we couldn't have seen coming. We couldn't have seen the decision to exit D-Day, the D-Day celebrations early. We couldn't have seen that coming. We couldn't have seen the betting scandal coming. So there are a few things. But, broadly speaking, the Labour Party started this election campaign ahead, and they finished in a victorious position.
Right, Nathaniel and Harry, gentlemen, thank you both for your time on the show today.
Thank you.
Let's move on away from the UK. Iranians have also been voting to elect a new president as a hardline conservative goes head-to-head with a reformist. The runoff election comes after no candidate secured a majority in the first round of the election on the 28th of June, which saw a historically low voter turnout of about 40%. One of them, Dr. Masood Pezeshkian, a former heart surgeon, is critical of Iran's notorious morality police. Dr. Pezeshkian has caused a stir after promising unity and cohesion and an end to Iran's isolation from the world. He has called for constructive negotiations with Western powers over renewal of the faltering 2015 nuclear deal, in which Iran agreed to curb its nuclear program in return for an easing of Western sanctions. However, his rival Saeed Jalili favors the status quo. A former nuclear negotiator, he enjoys strong support amongst Iran's most religious communities and is known for his hardline anti-Western stance and opposition to restoring the nuclear deal, which he says crossed Iran's red lines. The election had to be called after Iran's previous president, Ibrahim Raisi, was killed in a helicopter crash in May, in which 7 other people died. Well, it's a campaign season in Venezuela, which officially started on Thursday ahead of the July 28th presidential elections. According to the National Electoral Council, the governing United Socialist Party of Venezuela and its allies together, known as the Great Patriotic Poll, are backing President Nicolas Maduro's re-election bid with planned marches in 70 cities across the country. Thousands of people gathered for rallies held by President Maduro, as well as opposition leader Maria Corina Machado and opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez. In Caracas, President Maduro waved to crowds of supporters from a car near the official residence in the Miraflores Palace, marking the official start of his campaign. Later in the evening, the 61-year-old leader of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela addressed his supporters from the main stage, calling for the support of those of us who love Venezuela. And over in the United States, President Joe Biden is facing pressure from some major Democratic donors as he faces a critical few days in his campaign for re-election. A number of donors are publicly warning they will withhold funds unless Mr. Biden is replaced as the party's candidate following his disastrous debate performance last week. They include Abigail Disney, and heiress to the Disney family fortune, Hollywood producer Damon Lindelof, Hollywood agent Ari Emanuel, and philanthropist and entrepreneur Gideon Stein. Mr. Biden is seeking to shore up his candidacy this weekend, including with a rare primetime TV interview and a rally in Wisconsin. Pressure on the 81-year-old to step aside has grown following a debate marked by several instances where he lost his train of thought and was incomprehensible. Meanwhile, President Biden seemed to go off script during his speech on Independence Day celebrations at the White House, hitting out at his Republican rival Donald Trump. The comment comes as Mr. Biden is facing criticism and calls from some of his own party members to end his bid to become president for another term after his performance during the debate last week against Mr. Trump. However, the White House has insisted that Mr. Biden was absolutely not quitting.
Happy Independence Day. And by the way, you know, I was in that World War I cemetery in France. And the one that one of our colleagues, the former president, didn't want to go and be up there. I probably shouldn't even say it. Anyway, we got to just remember who the hell we are. We're the United States of America. And there's nothing beyond, and I mean this in the bottom of my heart, there's nothing beyond our capacity, nothing when we do it together. Not a single thing. We're the only nation in the history of the world that has gone through every crisis and come out stronger than we went into the crisis. Every single time. And by the way, I've been all over the world with you. I've been in and out of battles. Anyway, you're incredible. Understand, you are the finest fighting force in the history of the world. You're the only nation on earth founded on an idea. Not ethnicity, not geography, not anything else. On an idea. The idea is contained in that we hold these truths to be self-evident. But all men and women are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. We mean it. We've never fully lived up to it. We've never, ever, ever walked away from it. That's because of you. As your Commander-in-Chief, along with the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense, I want to thank you for your service and your sacrifice.
Away from that, on Sunday, France will be having its final round of parliamentary elections, but campaigns have seen high security threats. Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin says that more than 50 candidates and activists in France have come under physical attack in the run-up to Sunday's tense final round. He revealed that figure after government spokeswoman Prisca Thévenot, her deputy Virginie Lanlot, and a party activist were brutally assaulted as they put up election posters in southwest of Paris. The spate of assaults across France reflects the mood on the final day of the campaigning in an election that the far-right National Rally is poised to win. Some 30,000 officers will be deployed to police the voting on Sunday, including 5,000 in Paris. France teeters on the brink of handling the far-right, its largest ever parliamentary election victory. Germany's cabinet has blocked the planned sale of Volkswagen's gas turbine business to a Chinese-owned company. This decision comes amid rising trade tensions between the EU and China, as not just Brussels, but also Berlin are trying to reduce the risks when it comes to economic ties to Beijing. The gas turbine division is a subsidiary to MAN Energy Solutions. MAN Energy Solutions said last September that the government would take a closer look at the planned sale to Chinese state-owned CSIC Longjiang JH gas turbine. The deal was first announced in June 2023 at an undisclosed price. The GHGT belongs to the China State Shipbuilding Corporation, CSSC, which dominates the Chinese shipbuilding industry. Let's go more on this. We're joined by the DW's Cassandra Sundit. Cassandra, great to see you. Can you tell us more about this deal and why it was blocked?
Well, this planned sale of Volkswagen's gas turbine unit was first announced over a year ago. The unit, known as MAN Energy Solutions, then said in September that the German government was going to be taking a closer look. That's because the potential buyer, Longjiang GH Gas Turbine Company, actually belongs to the China State Shipbuilding Corporation, and they're a dominant player in the Chinese shipbuilding industry already. The reason that this deal was now under review, or was under review and is now blocked, is because German politicians were concerned that China would use the gas turbines not for civilian purposes, but to build and power warships. The government has cited national security concerns as the reason to block the deal. China's not happy about this. The foreign ministry said in a news conference that it opposes making normal trade cooperation political. Meanwhile, MAN Energy Solutions said that while it respected the government's decision, it would actually start a structured process to wind down the new development of gas turbines.
And this isn't the first time that Germany has reconsidered a deal about Chinese investment, right?
Right. It was interesting that this time German officials seemed to welcome the bloc. Economy Minister Robert Habeck, who is part of the Chancellor's cabinet, said his office welcomes investment, but that technology that's important for public order has to be protected. Now, this decision comes as Germany and Europe, to an extent, have been trying to figure out the line between good cooperation with China and economic dependency. Late last year, there was a lot of tension here because of a proposed sale of a stake in a container terminal to a Chinese company. It was controversial. The terminal was in the Hamburg harbor, but eventually the deal did go through. The stake that the Chinese company Costco was allowed to take was just under a quarter at a pointed 24.99%. For context, trade between China and Germany in 2023 was over 253 billion euros. It fell from a record high the previous year. So China is a really important trading partner for Germany, but the relationship is complicated, to say the least.
And speaking of complicated, new European Union tariffs have gone into effect. What's the latest on this?
Well, these tariffs on imported Chinese EVs were announced just a few weeks ago, but it was unclear if that was a starting position or a negotiating position and whether they would go into effect on July 4th. But now we know that despite a public call from the German Auto Association for Brussels to drop these tariffs, that they have gone into effect. And essentially, they are penalties of anywhere between 17 and 38% and would be on top of an existing 10% duty. So some of these brands could be about 50% higher. And they're specifically targeting electric vehicles made in China. Meanwhile, Chinese company SAIC Motor today requested a hearing on its provisional tariffs. And the reason for these penalties is because the EU is worried that the Chinese government is advantaging its own companies with state-funded subsidies. That then means that they can undercut European brands. And it's important to note that it's not just Chinese brands, but all EVs made in China that would be hit, including potentially German brands or Tesla, for example. So despite these penalties, or because of these penalties, there are also concerns that it could kind of slow down a green transition on Europe's roads here. Proponents say it will give the EU leverage in negotiations with Beijing and push producers to make cars in Europe.
Right, Cassandra, thank you for your time. Elsewhere now, Coast Guards in Mauritania have recovered 89 bodies of migrants from a boat which capsized in the Atlantic Ocean. 9 people, including a 5-year-old girl, were rescued, but dozens more are missing. Survivors say the vessel, a traditional fishing boat, set sail last week from the Senegalese-Gambian border with 170 people on board. Mauritania is a popular transit point for migrants trying to reach Europe from West Africa. The most common destination on the route is Spain's Canary Islands. The Spanish government says nearly 40,000 people arrived there last year. That's double the number from the previous year. The Caminado Frontiers charity estimates that more than 5,000 migrants died while trying to search or reach Spain by sea in the first 5 months of 2024. The Hurricane Beryl continues its destructive streak, hitting Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The hurricane has wreaked havoc across the Caribbean, destroying property and leaving thousands of homes without power. It's now classed as a Category 2, lashing the region's coastline on Friday morning, endangering the area's 2 million residents and the tourist hotspots of Cancun and Tulum. Beaches are closed and thousands of troops have been deployed to help as the storm hit the country's southeast shoreline. The U.S. National Hurricane Center has warned people in the area to shelter from the life-threatening conditions the hurricane will bring over the course of the day. Across the Caribbean, at least 10 people are known to have died and more are missing. Roofs have been torn from buildings and thousands of homes are left without power. Meanwhile, thousands of people in Northern California have been told to leave their homes as wildfires grow across the state during a heat wave. According to California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, about 28,000 people were under evacuation warnings or orders as of Thursday after the Thompson fire broke out 2 days earlier. Dangerously hot weather is expected to continue with temperatures of 47 degrees Celsius forecast in some areas until early next week. 74 structures across the state have been destroyed or damaged from fires this season. No deaths have been recorded. Well, record-breaking 11 straight days with temperatures rising to 46 degrees Celsius or higher are expected in the Coachella Valley as the first major summer heat wave that's expected to hit southwest of the U.S. Footage shows Palm Springs residents walking along the streets trying to protect themselves from the scorching sun with caps, umbrellas, and sunglasses. Misting cooling system can also be seen to bring some relief to restaurant goers. Residents say the extremely hot weather in Palm Springs made it hard for people to enjoy the 4th of July weekend. The other states of the southwestern region are also suffering from the excessive heat, with temperatures rising above 43 Celsius from California to Arizona. The National Weather Service announced an excessive heat warning, which means extremely dangerous heat conditions in the states of California, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington.
When I first got here, I was very excited about the sunshine and the heat, and over the course of 15 years, I've decided that this might be a little bit too hot for me. I live in Los Angeles. My mom lives out here in Palm Springs. We still decided to come out to visit her for the 4th of July, but it's very possible in the future we won't come out here for it. We'll stay at our house because it'll be too hot here.
Whatever it's going to be in the sun, we try to do in the morning when it's cooler or before the sun hits you. So that way we don't have like what's going to be directly in the sun, you know what I mean, hitting us when we're working.
And more the 4th of July celebrations without the heat, though. Large crowds joined and as Independence Day celebrations were held in Washington, D.C. On the streets marched a festive parade involving floats and costume participants from several communities and schools. Participants marched down Constitution Avenue and 7th Street, passing by all the significant monuments and ending at the Lincoln Memorial. The reading of the Declaration of Independence took place at Union Station on Massachusetts Avenue. 4th of July has been celebrated as Independence Day since 1791. The day became a paid holiday for federal employees in 1938.
Wow, we came here to be part of the 4th of July celebration, celebrating one of the freest countries that has ever existed on the planet. This is the first time for my grandkids to come, and it's the first time I've been here on July the 4th.
We came to enjoy July 4th in the American capital in Washington, D.C. We expected a grand parade, and it was fantastic. The marching bands are great. The floats are great.
And that's the world today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers. Bye for now.